Does Mahito have the ability with Idle Transfiguration to give someone a curse technique that doesn't have one? This is going to require a pretty nuanced answer, so let's get into that and a few other questions from you guys. All right, first, really quick, I'm still trying to get in touch with 2 people who sent in donations, but there wasn't enough information for me to cover what you guys were asking. So please reach out to me so we can get to the bottom of that and get that sorted for you guys. That is Big Lurk and Jacob B. So please hit me in my DMs. All right, with that out of the way, let's jump into this first question from Paul on if Mahito could give somebody a curse technique. And I should say that there are going to be some very slight manga spoilers in my answer here, but just in the form of names. So if you're an anime only, you can watch this one if you'd like to. So could Mahito just go grab a random guy off the street and give him a curse technique? I don't think so, but there's a lot of nuance in this answer because, like you mentioned, he gave Junpei a technique, and also at the end of Season 2, with Kenjaku launching the Culling Games, we know Idle Transfiguration was used to activate incarnated sorcerers, but also grant sorcerers curse techniques in the very same way that Mahito did with Junpei. But those are some very specific circumstances, I would say. In the case of Junpei and the other awakened sorcerers like Higuruma, for example, they were born already with those curse techniques. It's just that they were born unable to use them, if that makes sense. So Junpei theoretically had that jellyfish curse technique already in his brain the moment he was born. He just didn't have access to it, if that makes sense. This isn't a perfect example at all, but it would be kind of like, let's say you're born with blue eyes, but you're also just born not having any eyes for whatever reason. Like your eyes would have been blue had you had them, but some birth defect or some complication made it so you didn't have any eyes. Mahito then, with his curse technique, could give you eyes back and they would be blue. Does that make sense? So in the same way, Junpei, Higuruma, all the other awakened sorcerers were born with the brains that already had the curse technique, but just for whatever reason and however their bodies were created, they didn't have access to it. They couldn't use it. So that's all Mahito did. And then with the incarnated sorcerers, such as Yorozu, for example, Mahito just made it so that those people they were in were going to be adequate vessels. And so those people then incarnated. But those incarnated sorcerers already had curse techniques back from when they were originally alive. So Mahito didn't give them those curse techniques. So for that reason, I don't think he could grab a random stranger off the street and give them a curse technique. And I don't think he could, mostly because he doesn't understand how that works. He doesn't understand what that part of the brain looks like. Again, they are referred to as a black box in JJK, which just means we don't know how they operate. But if theoretically Mahito became a neurosurgeon, learned everything there was to learn about the brain and how it operates, and understood how curse techniques were engraved on the brain, then I think he could just give somebody a curse technique. But as it stands right now, he doesn't have that depth of knowledge to be able to do that. So that's my opinion, at least. And thank you for bearing with me on that yap sesh. Next up, we got this question from Rio on do you think Toto will learn RCT and heal his hand? And this is something I've talked about in a couple different videos, and I'm going to link one down below in the pinned comments on YouTube for you to check out. But really quickly, no. Simply learning RCT would not be enough to get his hand back. It's going to take more than that just because Mahito changed Toto's soul. So he can't simply heal his hand back. He could only theoretically heal whatever Mahito changed to his soul. So whether that's the amorphous blob or what, we don't really know. But again, check out my video I'm going to link if you want a more in-depth answer on this. Next up, we got this question from Bryce on did Choso feel Yuji pass away the first time? So for some context, Bryce is referring to in Season 1 when Sukuna ripped out Yuji's heart and he was gone there for a while, right? Because in Season 2, after Choso and Yuji fight and Yuji is on the brink, Choso starts freaking out and having those premonitions, right? So no, I don't think he had that during Season 1, mostly because he still wasn't incarnated at that point. He did exist to some extent, obviously, but he was just in that test tube, so I don't think he was able to have those premonitions in the same way he would once he was incarnated. Next up, we got this question from Ty, who asks, wouldn't storing the inverted spear of heaven inside the inventory curse just stab its throat and take it out, assuming its ability to store things is a curse technique and not an innate trait? The inverted spear should have nullified it. So this is really funny. I never thought about this interaction before. But I don't think it's a curse technique. I do think what the inventory curse is doing is just an innate trait of it. So for that reason, that's probably why there's no interaction between the inverted spear and it. But this is really funny to think about. And we could get really in the weeds on this, because what exactly does the inverted spear do, right? We've only seen it nullify curse techniques, but a nullification curse technique itself, we know, can do more than that. It can nullify just jujutsu in general. So is there a chance the inverted spear should be having some sort of weird interaction with the curse spirit in general, even though it's not a curse technique? Maybe, but again, I just think this is like such a small thing. I wouldn't call it a plot hole by any means. But yeah, this is just a really funny interaction I never thought about. Alrighty, y'all, from this point onward, we are going to get into some manga spoiler questions. So for my anime onlys that stuck around this far, I appreciate y'all, but you're probably going to want to head out. So next up, we got this question from Boss, who wanted to know if Mahoraga can adapt to Takaba's curse technique. And this one's interesting, but at the end of the day, I think yes. I think Mahoraga can adapt to virtually anything. So assuming he wasn't just instantly taken out by something Takaba did, I think he would ultimately adapt to the weird kind of reality manipulation that was going on. And plus, knowing how Takaba doesn't really ever take anybody out, I really don't think he could win against Mahoraga. No matter what hijinks there were, I think Mahoraga would essentially adapt to whatever we want to call what Takaba is doing and defeat him. So yes, I think he can. Next up, we got this question from Halu that says, let's say Gojo's gone and doesn't come back. What will happen to the Six Eyes? We know that the Six Eyes and Tengen are connected through fate, but with Tengen gone, what would happen to them? Are they gone forever? So here's what I'll say. I don't think Tengen is gone, because yes, they became kind of more curse-like, which allowed Kenjaku to absorb them, and now Tengen exists in this kind of pseudo-fetal state that Sukuna just consumed, right? And the merger is set to happen, and once that happens, who really knows what we can call that entity anymore, if it really is at any part Tengen or if Tengen is completely gone. But at least at this point, before that merger, I would say Tengen still exists, just in a little bit different type of existence than previous, right? All that to say is that the connection between Tengen and the Six Eyes and the Star Plasma Vessel through fate, I think still exists right now. So if Gojo were to be gone and not come back, I do think the Six Eyes could manifest, just because Tengen's still around. Now, if Tengen were to truly pass away and be completely gone, then that's a good question. Maybe the Six Eyes would no longer manifest, since their destiny can no longer be fulfilled. And that's even if they really are truly connected by fate and destiny like we're told. It does seem that way, but we don't know for sure. There's still a lot of questions about Tengen and Kenjaku and just everything in that regard. But I hope that helps answer your question. Next up, we got this question from Andrew, and y'all feel free to pause to read the whole thing if you'd like, but he's essentially asking if I think Sukno will merge all of the 10 shadows to make one strong totality. So I personally don't think so. I certainly think it's possible. Like, we could see him still bust out the 10 shadows in some form or the other. But personally, I think that it would be more interesting and poetic and satisfying if we get to see this ultimate totality from Megami, like if he's the one to do it. So again, that's not to say that Sukuna couldn't, but at this point, I think he got what he wanted out of the 10 Shadows, to learn from Mahoraga and get past infinity. As far as other just like powerful uses of it, I don't think he really cares. I think he has enough in his arsenal to handle things on those fronts. And again, not to say that like he wouldn't use it out of principle or anything. Like if he really got pushed into a corner, then sure, I'm sure he'll do whatever he can to get out of it. But yeah, I really think we would see that from Megami more so than Sukuna. Next up, we got a couple questions from JoJo. The first one being, why didn't Megami tame Round Deer? And honestly, I just think he was too out of his depth at the point in the story where he could have done this before Sukuna took him over. Because we don't know everything about Round Deer, but we know that it can perform RCT, right? So I imagine this is a Shikigami that is going to be constantly healing itself. So unless you can really pack out some damage, it's going to be hard to take down, especially if you can't perform RCT yourself. So yeah, I just don't think Megami was skilled enough back when he could have done this. And then next up, what are you doing to me, man? You're trying to put me in the middle of a blood feud here, but he wants to know who would win, General or Debate Lords, from our Discord. And I think it depends on what we're talking about. If we're talking about a debate, then yeah, I'm going to give it to Debate Lords because that's their whole wheelhouse, right? They got the practice and the experience. But if we're just talking about a war, then maybe General, just from pure numbers. Anyways, that's all for this one. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to join the Discord.